The rain fell like a funeral the night Arya became a bride. She stood in a dress that wasn't hers, in a church that smelled of old incense and older lies, and waited for a man she'd never met to decide if she would live through mourning. The Mafia boss everyone whispered about didn't arrive with fanfare. He arrived like winter, silent, inevitable, and cold enough to stop breath. When his eyes found hers across the marble aisle, Arya understood three things. He was younger than the rumors claimed, more beautiful than any dangerous man had a right to be, and he was looking at her the way someone looks at a problem they haven't decided how to solve. She expected death, she'd made peace with it. What she didn't expect was what he would ask of her after the vows, an impossible condition that would unravel everything she thought she knew about survival, about monsters, and about the difference between the two. If you've ever stood at the edge of something you couldn't come back from, if you've ever had to choose between fear and something that might be worse than fear, then stay with us. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from tonight. Because this isn't just a story about a woman who married a monster. It's about what happens when the monster looks at you like you're the only thing in his world that still remembers how to be human and asks you for the one thing you can't give. There would be a night, weeks from now, when he would stand in the rain outside her bedroom door and say her name like it was the only prayer he remembered. When she would have to choose between running toward him or running away, and neither choice would feel like freedom. There would be a moment when his world and hers would collide in a room full of men who measured loyalty in blood, and she would have to speak a truth that could kill them both. There would be mornings when she'd wake to find him watching her sleep, his expression caught between wonder and something that looked like grief. Some loves aren't built on trust. They're built on the wreckage of everything trust was supposed to protect. They're in the way a hand reaches across darkness without knowing what it will find. In the way fear sometimes wears the same face as recognition. This is a story about impossible choices, about the forced marriage that was supposed to be a sentence, not a beginning. Arya had lost everything the night her father's debts came due. Her freedom, her future, the small bookshop where she'd tried to build a life that belonged only to her. She'd lose her life too if she refused the arrangement. His family didn't negotiate. They collected. He'd already lost more than most men survive. He'd inherited an empire built on violence at an age when most men are still learning how to be afraid. He'd learned young. In his world, weakness was a currency you paid with your life. Love was the most expensive weakness of all. This is how two people who should have been each other's ending became each other's only way through. How a man who'd forgotten what it meant to want something that wasn't about power looked at a woman in a wedding dress and realized he'd been holding his breath for years. How a woman who'd learned to make herself small discovered that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is let yourself be seen. It begins in October, in a city where old money and old violence wear the same elegant face, where autumn tastes like espresso and regret, and the rain never quite washes anything clean, where men like him live in penthouses that overlook everything they own, which is nearly everything, and women like Arya learn to be invisible in rooms full of people who've forgotten how to look at anything that doesn't serve them. His estate sits on the edge of the city like a beautiful scar, all iron gates and security cameras and roses that bloom too perfectly to be trusted. And it begins with a lie. The lie that this was just a transaction, just a marriage on paper, a debt paid in ceremony and signatures. The lie that Arya could survive this without feeling anything. The lie that he had chosen her randomly, that her name had simply been the unlucky one pulled from the list of families that owed him everything. He'd been lying since the moment he saw her. And the impossible condition he would give her 3 days after their wedding, the one she would spend the next 2 months trying to understand, would prove that some lies are just truths that haven't learned how to speak yet. The meeting happened in her father's study, but it felt like an execution. Arya stood by the window while 3 men in expensive suits discussed her future as if she were a piece of furniture being appraised. Her father sat behind his desk, smaller than she'd ever seen him, his hands shaking slightly as he signed documents he didn't read. The man from the family, not the boss himself, not yet, just an emissary with cold eyes and colder words, explained the terms with the efficiency of someone ordering dinner. Miss Chen will marry him in 4 days. The ceremony will be private. The marriage will settle the outstanding debt in full, plus interest accrued over the last 18 months. She'll live at the estate. All prior obligations will be considered void upon completion of the ceremony. Arya watched rain trace patterns down the window glass and thought about how strange it was that the end of your life could sound so bureaucratic. Her father didn't look at her. He hadn't looked at her since the men arrived. Shame, she understood, had its own language. It spoke in averted eyes and bent shoulders, and the particular silence of a man who'd gambled away his daughter's freedom and lost. "Does she agree?" the emissary asked, though his tone suggested her agreement was decorative at best. "She agrees," her father answered, and Arya felt something inside her chest go very still and very cold. She wanted to scream, to run, to ask what happened to the world where fathers protected their daughters instead of trading them like currency. But she'd learned young that wanting things didn't make them appear. So she turned from the window and met the emissary's eyes and nodded once. "I agree," she said, and her voice didn't shake at all. The emissary smiled, the kind of smile that had nothing to do with pleasure. "He'll be pleased." Arya doubted that. She doubted the Mafia boss felt pleasure about anything that didn't involve power or profit. She'd heard the stories. Everyone had. The young Don who'd taken over the family business when his father was killed, who'd consolidated power with a ruthlessness that made grown men nervous, who collected debts the way some people collected art, with patience, precision, and an excellent memory for details. She was just another debt, another acquisition, another problem solved with money and influence, and the kind of fear that made people sign their daughters away without asking questions. The men left. Her father poured himself a drink with shaking hands. Arya stood by the window and watched the rain and wondered if you could drown in air, if you could suffocate on all the words you'd never get to say. "Arya," her father started, and she shook her head. "Don't," she whispered. "Please, just don't." Because if he apologized, she might forgive him, and she couldn't afford forgiveness right now. She could only afford the cold, hard armor of anger, the only thing keeping her spine straight and her eyes dry. She left him there with his whiskey and his shame and climbed the stairs to her childhood bedroom. Everything looked the same. The books, the sketches she'd collected, the window seat where she used to dream about a future that belonged to her. 4 days. She had 4 days of being Arya Chen, bookshop owner, dreamer, woman with a life that was small but hers, and then she would become his wife. Property, whatever that meant to a man who'd built an empire on other people's fear. She didn't cry. Crying felt like surrender, and she wasn't ready to surrender yet. Instead, she opened her laptop and searched for information about the man she would marry. There wasn't much. He was careful about his public image. But there were photos. Dark hair. Darker eyes. A face that was all sharp angles and careful control. He looked, she thought, like someone who'd learned to turn himself into a weapon and forgotten how to be anything else. In 4 days, she would stand across from that face and promise forever. The rain kept falling. Arya watched it and thought about drowning. She fell asleep with her laptop still open, her phone dark and silent beside her. No one called. No one texted to ask if she was okay. The people who might have cared had slowly disappeared from her life as her father's gambling debts grew. Friends who stopped returning calls, distant relatives who suddenly had very pressing reasons to be unreachable. She was alone with this. Alone with the weight of a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. When she woke, grey morning light filtered through her curtains. 3 days left. The number felt both infinite and impossibly short. She spent that first day moving through her apartment like a ghost, touching things she would have to leave behind, the books she'd collected since childhood, the plants she'd nursed back to life, the small paintings she'd bought from street artists because they'd made her feel something. None of it would fit in the life she was walking into. None of it would make sense in a house built on violence and control. By the 3rd day, she'd stopped sleeping, stopped eating much. Her body had begun the process of shutting down, preparing for an ending it didn't yet understand wouldn't be death, or at least not the kind of death she'd imagined. The night before the wedding, she stood at her window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, the man she would marry was also awake, also preparing. She wondered if he thought about her at all, if she was anything more than a line item on a ledger, a problem solved, a debt collected. She wondered if he knew she was terrified. Some bargains aren't made with words. They're made with the particular silence of people who've run out of choices. The church was older than memory and twice as cold. Arya arrived alone. Her father hadn't been invited or hadn't had the courage to come. She wasn't sure which. A woman in an elegant black suit met her at the entrance. introduced herself as Maria, and led her to a small room where a wedding dress hung like a ghost. "He selected it himself," Maria said, and Arya wondered what kind of man chose a wedding dress for a bride he'd never met. The dress was beautiful in the way expensive things often are. Silk, the color of winter, simple lines, nothing excessive. It fit perfectly, which shouldn't have surprised her but did. Someone had paid attention, someone had cared enough to get her measurements right, even if they didn't care enough to ask if she wanted any of this. Maria did her hair, a simple twist that left her neck exposed, and handed her a bouquet of white roses that smelled like funerals. "He's waiting," Maria said, and her expression wasn't unkind, just careful, like she'd learned to be careful around sharp things. The sanctuary was nearly empty. A priest stood at the altar looking vaguely uncomfortable. Two men in dark suits, witnesses presumably, stood near the front pew. And at the center of it all, hands in his pockets, watching her with an expression she couldn't read, was the man whose name she still didn't know. He was younger than she'd expected, late 20s maybe, tall enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than her father's debt, and he stood with the particular stillness of someone who'd learned that movement could mean danger. Arya walked down the aisle alone. Her heels clicked against marble. The sound echoed like a countdown. When she reached him, his eyes moved over her face, not leering, not invasive, just searching, looking for something. She didn't know what, didn't know if she wanted him to find it. "Arya," he said, and his voice was lower than she'd imagined, rougher. She didn't respond, didn't trust herself to speak without her voice breaking. "My name is Luca," he continued, as if introducing himself at a wedding to someone you'd forced into marriage was a normal thing to do. Luca Vitale. Vitale. The name carried weight in this city, the kind of weight that made people cross streets and lower their voices and forget what they'd seen. The ceremony was brief. The priest rushed through the vows like he had somewhere more important to be, which, given the circumstances, he probably did. Luca's responses were clear, firm. Arya's voice shook slightly on "I do," but she got the words out. When the priest pronounced them married, Luca stepped closer. For a terrible moment, Arya thought he would kiss her, that he would claim that particular intimacy in front of the witnesses, make it official and real and inescapable. Instead, he took her hand, brought it to his lips, pressed a kiss to her knuckles that lasted half a second, and felt like a brand. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Vitale," he said quietly, and something in his eyes looked almost apologetic. Arya didn't understand why a man who'd just acquired a wife, the way someone might acquire property, would look at her like he wished things could be different. The witnesses approached, both men in their 40s, faces carved from the same stone as Luca's expression. One of them nodded to her. "Ma'am." The word felt wrong, too formal, too adult for someone who still felt like a girl playing dress-up in someone else's life. They signed papers. So many papers. Arya's hand cramped from writing her new name over and over. Arya Vitale, Arya Vitale, Arya Vitale. Each signature felt like erasing a little more of who she used to be. When it was done, Luca offered her his arm. "The car is waiting." She took it because refusing seemed pointless. His arm was solid under her hand, warm through the expensive fabric of his suit. He smelled like cedar and something darker, gunpowder maybe, or just the particular scent of danger. The rain had started again by the time they stepped outside. Luca held an umbrella over them both as they walked to the black car idling at the curb. The driver opened the door without meeting her eyes. Arya slid into leather seats that smelled new and expensive, and nothing like her life. Luca settled beside her. The door closed. The world outside became muted, distant, like watching a movie of someone else's tragedy. They drove in silence for 10 minutes before Luca finally spoke. "I know this isn't what you wanted," he said, his eyes fixed on the rain-blurred window. Arya almost laughed. Understatement of the century. But she swallowed the bitter sound and said nothing. "I know you're afraid," he continued, and now he did look at her. "But I'm not going to hurt you, Arya. That was never the point of this." "Then what was the point?" The words escaped before she could stop them. "If not to hurt me, then what? To own me? To prove you could?" Something flickered across his face. Pain? Regret? It was gone too quickly to name. "To protect you," he said quietly, and the absurdity of it, the sheer audacity of claiming protection while forcing someone into marriage, made something inside her snap. Protect me. She turned to face him fully. You took everything from me. My freedom, my choice, my life. That's not protection, that's prison. I know, he said, and the simplicity of it disarmed her. I know, but your father's debts, the people he owed, they weren't going to stop with money, Arya. They were going to take their payment in other ways, worse ways. She didn't want to understand, didn't want to consider that maybe this nightmare had been a rescue from something darker. The car pulled through iron gates that opened like jaws. The estate rose before them, all stone and glass and the kind of wealth that stops feeling like money and starts feeling like power. Luca helped her from the car, his hand gentle on her elbow. They climbed marble steps together. The door opened before they reached it, and an older woman with kind eyes and grey hair appeared. Mrs. Vitale, she said warmly. Welcome home. I'm Rosa. I manage the house. Home. The word tasted like a lie. But Arya smiled because she didn't know what else to do. Because the armor she'd built over the last 4 days was starting to crack, and if she didn't hold herself together, she would shatter right here on these perfect marble steps. Thank you, she managed. Rosa led them inside, chattering about dinner and which room had been prepared, and did Arya have any dietary preferences. The words washed over her like white noise. She followed numbly through halls that could have been museums, past art that probably cost more than her father's shop. They stopped at a door. Rosa opened it to reveal a bedroom that was somehow both vast and suffocating. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a bed big enough to get lost in, everything in shades of cream and gold. Your room, Luca said, and Arya turned to him sharply. My room? I'm not a monster, Arya, he said softly. You'll have your own space, your own privacy. This marriage may be unconventional, but I'm not going to force intimacies you don't want. She didn't know whether to feel relieved or more afraid. At least with clear threats, you knew where you stood. Get some rest, he continued. We'll talk tomorrow, about expectations, and about the condition. He turned to leave, paused in the doorway. When he looked back at her, his expression was unreadable. For what it's worth, he said, I'm sorry. Then he was gone, and Arya was alone in a room that was beautiful and empty, and nothing like the life she'd imagined for herself. She sank onto the edge of the bed and finally let herself cry. Some prisons are gilded, but the bars are just as real. Arya woke to unfamiliar silence. No traffic sounds, no neighbors arguing through thin walls, no familiar creak of her old apartment settling into morning. Just vast, expensive quiet that pressed against her ears like water. For 3 heartbeats she didn't remember. Then reality crashed back. The wedding, the rain, Luca's unreadable eyes, the room that was hers, but didn't belong to her at all. Sunlight filtered through curtains she didn't remember closing. Someone must have come in while she slept. The thought made her skin crawl. Even unconscious, she wasn't alone here. Even in sleep, she was being watched, managed, controlled. She found her bag in the corner, the small overnight case Maria had told her to pack. It contained almost nothing: a change of clothes, toiletries, her phone charger, the detritus of a life that no longer existed. The bathroom was marble and chrome, and big enough to be its own apartment. Arya stood under a shower spray that felt like standing in rain made of knives, and scrubbed at skin that still felt like someone else's. The wedding dress hung on the back of the door, already cleaned and pressed by invisible hands. She couldn't look at it. She dressed in jeans and a sweater, her own clothes, the soft, worn fabric, a small rebellion against all this suffocating newness. When she opened the bedroom door, she half expected to find it locked, but it opened easily onto an empty hallway. She followed the smell of coffee downstairs, through rooms that seemed designed to make people feel small. Eventually, she found a kitchen, or at least a room with appliances that might charitably be called a kitchen if kitchens could cost more than houses. Rosa stood at a gleaming stove, humming softly. She turned when Arya entered, and her smile seemed genuine. "Good morning, Mrs. Vitale. Coffee?" Arya nodded, unable to trust her voice yet. Rosa poured from a French press into a cup that probably cost more than Arya's entire dishware collection at her old apartment. "Cream? Sugar? Black?" Arya managed. "Thank you." She took the cup to the window and looked out at grounds that stretched further than she could see. Gardens, a fountain, somewhere in the distance, the glint of water, a pool, maybe, or a pond. It was beautiful in the way things are beautiful when you can't touch them without permission. "He's in his study," Rosa said casually, as if Arya had asked. Second floor, east wing. The door with the lion handle. Arya turned. Does he expect me? He said you might want to talk when you were ready. Rosa's expression was carefully neutral. But there's no rush. You could eat first, or walk the gardens, or just stay here and drink your coffee. The kindness in her voice made Arya's throat tight. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She ate because her body demanded it. Eggs and toast that tasted like nothing, like all sensation had been leached from the world. Rosa moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, never hovering but somehow always aware if Arya needed anything. After breakfast, Arya climbed the stairs, found the east wing, found the door with the lion handle, stood there for 5 full minutes, trying to convince herself to knock. When she finally did, Luca's voice came immediately. Come in. He sat behind a desk that looked carved from a single piece of dark wood, papers spread before him, reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked different in daylight, still dangerous but more human, less like a story people told to scare children. He removed the glasses when he saw her, gestured to a chair across from his desk. Sit, please. Arya sat because standing felt like too much effort. Did you sleep? He asked. Eventually. Rosa is making sure you have everything you need? Yes. Good. He leaned back, studying her with those dark, unreadable eyes. I told you yesterday we'd talk about expectations. Arya's hands tightened around the arms of the chair. Here it came. The other shoe. The real terms of this bargain. This house has rules, Luca said. You should know them. She waited. First, you have freedom within the estate, the grounds, the house, all of it. But you don't leave without security, not yet. Maybe not for a while. So I'm a prisoner. You're protected, he corrected, but his expression suggested he knew it was the same thing. Second, there will be events. Family gatherings, business dinners. You'll be expected to attend as my wife, to be polite, appropriate, and silent about anything you see or hear. The dutiful wife, she said bitterly. The smart wife, he replied. The kind who lives long enough to find her way through this. The threat was subtle but clear. Arya felt her pulse quicken. Third, Luca continued, and now his voice changed, became quieter, more careful. We need to discuss sleeping arrangements. Her breath caught. I meant what I said yesterday. Your room is yours, I won't intrude, but... He hesitated, and she realized with shock that he looked uncomfortable. For appearances, for the family, they'll expect evidence of a consummated marriage. Arya felt her face burn. Evidence. I can have Rosa handle it, he said quickly. She's discreet. No one will look too closely. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt oddly hollow, like even the pretense of choice had been stripped away. Is that everything? She asked. No. Luca stood, moved to the window. His shoulders were rigid under his shirt. There's one more thing. The condition I mentioned. Her heart hammered. Here it was. The impossible thing. He turned to face her, and his expression was complicated, vulnerable in a way that made him look younger, made him look almost human. I need you to teach me, he said quietly. Arya blinked. Teach you what? How to be human, Luca said, and the simplicity of it stole her breath. How to feel something other than control and fear. How to want something that isn't about power. He moved closer, stopped a careful distance away. I've been a weapon my whole life, Arya. A tool. A thing that solves problems and collects debts and doesn't get to ask what it wants, because wanting is weakness. He crouched in front of her chair, bringing their eyes level. I looked at you across that church, and I felt something I didn't recognize. Something that made me realize I've been holding my breath for 10 years, waiting for permission to exhale. His hand moved as if to touch hers, then stopped, hovered in the air between them. So that's my impossible condition, he said softly. Teach me how to be the kind of man who deserves to look at you. Teach me how to want something without taking it, how to hope without weaponizing it. Arya stared at him, her mind reeling. And if I can't, she whispered, if I don't know how, then we figure it out together, Luca said. But I need you to try. That's the bargain. Not your body, not your submission, just your willingness to see if the man I want to become is possible. He stood, moved back to his desk, gave her space to breathe. You don't have to answer now, he said, but I needed you to know. This marriage, this arrangement, it doesn't have to be what you think it is. It could be something else, Arya sat in stunned silence, her world tilting on its axis. She'd expected demands for her body, her obedience, her fear. She hadn't expected this. A man who'd taken everything from her, asking somehow for the one thing she didn't know how to give, her humanity, her hope, her willingness to believe that monsters could learn to be men. Some conditions aren't demands. They're confessions dressed as bargains. Arya spent 3 days avoiding Luca after their conversation. It wasn't difficult. The estate was large enough to lose yourself in, and Luca seemed to understand she needed space. He left for hours at a time. Business, she assumed, though she didn't ask and he didn't volunteer information. When he was home, he kept to his study or disappeared into parts of the house she hadn't explored. She spent her time in the library, a room with floor-to-ceiling shelves and windows that overlooked the gardens. The books were immaculate, organized with military precision, and clearly never read. She ran her fingers along spines that probably cost more than she used to make in a month and felt profoundly alone. On the 4th day, Rosa found her there. "He asked me to give you this," Rosa said, holding out a small envelope. Arya took it carefully, as if it might bite. Inside was a key and a note in precise handwriting. "The East Garden. Your space if you want it." She found the garden an hour later, tucked behind high hedges that offered privacy from the house. It was smaller than the main grounds, more intimate. Wildflowers mixed with carefully cultivated roses. A small bench sat under a cherry tree that was just beginning to bloom. It was beautiful, and more importantly, it felt separate, like a place that could belong to her instead of just existing around her. She sat on the bench and cried for the first time since her wedding night, not desperate, terrified sobs, just quiet tears for all the versions of herself she'd lost. The girl who thought freedom meant working in a bookshop and coming home to her small apartment. The woman who'd believed she had agency over her own life. "I'm sorry," Arya startled. Luca stood at the garden entrance, hands in his pockets, looking uncertain in a way that didn't match his reputation. "I didn't mean to intrude," he continued. "I just wanted to make sure you found it." "It's beautiful," she managed, wiping at her face. "Thank you." He moved closer but stopped several feet away, respecting her space even here, in the garden he'd given her. "I meant what I said," Luca spoke quietly. "About the condition, about wanting to become different. But I realize I never asked if you wanted that, if you care whether I change or stay exactly as monstrous as the stories say." Arya studied him. In daylight, with his guard momentarily down, he looked tired. There were shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, a tension in his shoulders that suggested he carried weight she couldn't see. "Why me?" she asked. "If you wanted to change, why force someone into marriage? Why not just try?" "Because I don't know how to try," Luca said simply. "I don't know how to be vulnerable without it being a tactic, how to want without it being possession. Every instinct I have is about control, about making sure I'm never the weak one in the room." He sank onto the bench beside her, not close enough to touch, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "When I saw your file," he continued, "when I read about you and your father's debts, I saw an opportunity, not just to collect what was owed, but to—" He paused, searching for words. "To practice, to have someone in my life who I couldn't just order around and expect them to smile about it. That's what I am to you?" Arya turned to face him. "Practice? No." He met her eyes. "You're the first person in 10 years who's looked at me like I'm human, like I could be human if I tried. Even when you're afraid, even when you hate me, and I know you do, you look at me like I'm a man making terrible choices, not a monster who can't choose." Arya wanted to argue, to say that she did see him as a monster, that there was no humanity in what he'd done to her, but looking at him now, seeing the vulnerability in his expression, the desperate hope he was trying to hide, she couldn't quite make the words true. "I don't know how to teach you to be human," she said finally. "I barely know how to be human myself right now." "Then start with truth," Luca said. "Tell me one true thing, something you'd never say if you were trying to survive me." The request was so unexpected that Arya laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You want truth? Please." "Fine." She turned her whole body toward him. "I hate you. I hate that you took my choice. I hate that you've made yourself into my savior and my captor, and somehow expect me to be grateful for the distinction. I hate that you're sitting here looking at me like I'm your redemption when I never asked to save anyone, least of all the man who destroyed my life." She expected anger, expected him to shut down, to remind her who held power here. Instead, he smiled, sad and genuine. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For hating you? For saying it out loud? For not pretending?" He stood, offered her his hand. "That's the kind of truth I need. The kind that costs something." Arya looked at his hand, thought about all the reasons she shouldn't take it. Took it anyway. His grip was warm, careful. He helped her up and then released her immediately. "I have a meeting," he said. "But tomorrow, if you're willing, I'd like to have dinner. Just us. No pretense, no performance, just two people trying to figure out if this impossible thing could work." "Dinner," Arya repeated. "Or breakfast. Or we could just sit in silence and read books. Whatever you want." He smiled slightly. "I'm new at this. You'll have to tell me what normal people do." "Normal people don't have forced marriages," she pointed out. "Then we'll have to figure out our own version of normal," Luca said, and walked away before she could respond. Arya stood in her garden, because despite everything it did feel like hers, and tried to understand what had just happened. He'd asked for truth, and she'd given him her rawest anger, and instead of punishing her for it, he'd thanked her. She didn't know what to do with a monster who wanted to learn to be human. Didn't know what it meant that part of her, despite everything, wanted to try. The cherry blossoms drifted in the breeze, petals falling like tiny surrenders. Arya watched them settle on the grass and wondered if transformation was always this uncomfortable, if becoming something new always required letting old certainties die. She stayed in the garden until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. When she finally returned to the house, Rosa was setting the table for dinner. "Mr. Vitale won't be joining you tonight," Rosa said. "His meeting is running late, but he left instructions for your favorite meal." "He doesn't know what my favorite meal is," Arya said. Rosa smiled mysteriously. "He asked me to find out." Dinner was pasta with cream sauce and mushrooms, exactly what Arya would have ordered if given the choice. It shouldn't have meant anything, but somehow, in a life where every choice had been stripped away, someone caring enough to learn what she liked felt like a revolution. She ate slowly, tasting each bite, trying to remember what it felt like to want something as simple as good food and actually receive it. That night, she slept dreamlessly for the first time since the wedding. And when she woke, she found a note slipped under her door. "Thank you for the truth. Tomorrow will you teach me how to ask better questions?" Arya held the note for a long time, studying the careful handwriting. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into the drawer of her nightstand. She didn't know yet if she would forgive him, didn't know if forgiveness was even the right framework for something like this, but maybe, just maybe, she could teach him to ask better questions. Some transformations begin with permission to tell the truth, even when the truth is, "I hate you." Arya chose the blue dress, not because it was expensive, though it was, like everything in the closet that had appeared in her room overnight, filled with clothes in her exact size. Not because she wanted to impress Luca, but because the color reminded her of the sky over her old apartment, and she needed something familiar, even if it was just a shade of blue. Rosa had told her dinner would be at 7 in the smaller dining room. "The one that feels like a room instead of a museum," she'd said with a knowing smile. Arya arrived exactly on time, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. She'd spent the day in her garden, trying to prepare for this, trying to understand what it meant to have dinner with a man who was simultaneously her captor and someone asking to be saved. Luca was already there, standing by a window that overlooked the darkening grounds. He'd changed from his usual suits into dark slacks and a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. It was the most casual she'd seen him, and it made him look younger, almost approachable. He turned when she entered, and something crossed his face. Surprise? Appreciation? Before his expression settled into careful neutrality. "You came," he said. "You asked me to. I gave you the option." "That's different." He pulled out a chair for her. "Thank you for choosing to be here." The table was set simply. 2 plates, wine glasses, candles that weren't trying too hard. Through the windows, Arya could see lights coming on across the grounds as night settled in. "I thought we could start with wine," Luca said, pouring something red into her glass. "And questions. You said yesterday that you didn't know how to teach me to be human, so I thought we could start smaller. I ask you a question, you answer honestly, then you ask me one. We take turns until one of us wants to stop. That's your idea of teaching you to be human? 20 questions? It's a start," he said, settling into his chair across from her. I need to learn what normal people talk about, what they care about, how they connect without it being about power or strategy. Arya took a sip of wine. It was good. Of course it was good. Everything in this house was good in the way things are good when money is no obstacle. All right, you first. Luca considered her for a moment. What did you dream about, before all this, when you thought your life was your own? The question was more intimate than she'd expected. She almost deflected, gave him something shallow and safe, but he'd asked for truth, and some part of her wanted to give it. I wanted to travel, she said finally. I'd never left the city. My whole life in the same 10-mile radius. I used to look at the books in my shop, travel guides, novels set in distant places, and imagine what it would feel like to be somewhere no one knew me, to reinvent myself completely. Where would you have gone, if you could go anywhere? That's 2 questions. I'm new at this. I don't know the rules yet. Arya almost smiled. Japan, maybe. Or Iceland. Somewhere beautiful and completely different from here. Luca nodded slowly, as if filing the information away. My turn, Arya asked. Yes. When did you last feel happy? Actually happy, not just satisfied or in control. When did you last feel something that wasn't about business or power? Luca's expression shuttered slightly. He took a drink of wine, buying time. I don't know, he admitted finally. I don't remember the last time I felt anything that wasn't useful. Anger is useful. Fear keeps you alert. Control keeps you alive. But happiness? He shook his head. That's a luxury I couldn't afford. That sounds lonely. It is. He met her eyes. It's profoundly lonely, which is why I need... He gestured vaguely between them. This, whatever this is. Rosa appeared with the first course. Something that looked artistic and probably had a French name Arya couldn't pronounce. She set it down with a smile and disappeared again. Your turn, Arya said. Luca cut into his food, not eating, just moving it around his plate. What scares you most about being here, about this arrangement? Arya's breath caught. The question was too honest, too direct, but she'd promised truth. That I'll forget, she said quietly. That I'll get comfortable here with the pretty gardens and the good wine and the silk dresses. That I'll wake up one day and realize I've traded my whole self for safety. That I'll become the kind of person who doesn't remember what it felt like to have choices. Luca set down his fork. I don't want that either. Then why did you take my choices in the first place? Because I'm still learning the difference between protection and possession, he said. Because I saw you and wanted to keep you safe, and the only way I knew how was to bring you here, to make you mine in the eyes of everyone who might hurt you. I'm not yours. I know. He smiled slightly, sadly. But they think you are, and in my world, perception is armor. Arya ate in silence for a moment, tasting nothing. My turn. Why did you really choose me? The truth this time, not the story about protecting me from my father's debts. Luca was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, because you looked lost. In your file photo in the surveillance footage my people gathered, you looked lost in a way I recognized, like you were trying to find your way back to yourself and couldn't remember the route. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes intense in the candlelight. And I thought maybe someone who's lost could understand someone who's never been found. Maybe you'd see me and recognize something. Not the power or the fear or the reputation, just the lost part. Arya's throat tightened. That's not fair. I know. You can't make me responsible for your humanity. That's not how this works. I'm not asking you to be responsible for it, Luca said carefully. I'm asking you to witness it. To tell me when I'm getting it right and when I'm still thinking like a weapon instead of a person. Rosa returned with the main course. They ate in silence for a while, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Just 2 people sitting with difficult truths. Your turn, Arya said finally. If you could change one thing about this situation, not escape it, not undo it, but change one aspect of how it works, what would it be? Arya considered. I'd want to leave. Not forever, not to run away. Just to go outside these gates without an armed escort, to walk down a street and buy coffee and remember what it feels like to be anonymous. Done? She looked up sharply. What? Done. Starting tomorrow you can leave. With Marco, he's security but he's subtle. He'll keep his distance. You can go wherever you want in the city for however long you want. Why? Because you asked. Because it's a reasonable thing to want. And because I need to learn that keeping you safe doesn't require keeping you caged. Arya stared at him. Just like that? Just like that. Luca smiled slightly. See? I'm learning. She didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to process a captor who listened to requests and actually granted them. My turn, Luca said. What would it take for you to stop hating me? I don't know if I hate you anymore, Arya said, surprising herself with the admission. I think I'm angry. I think I'm scared. But hate, she shook her head. Hate is simple, this is complicated. Complicated I can work with, Luca said quietly. They finished dinner talking about smaller things, books they'd read, music they liked, the particular loneliness of city living. Luca was surprisingly well read, though he confessed he mostly read to understand people, to find strategies in fiction that might apply to his business. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard, Arya said. What is? Reading novels like they're instruction manuals. That's not what stories are for. Then what are they for? To remind you what it feels like to be human, she said, to let you live other lives for a while, to make you feel things you didn't know you could feel. Luca was quiet for a long moment. Will you teach me that? How to read for feeling instead of strategy? I can try. When dinner ended, Luca walked her to the base of the stairs. They stood in the entrance hall with its vaulted ceiling and chandelier that cast complicated shadows. Thank you, Luca said, for tonight, for answering my questions, for being honest even when it cost you something. You're welcome. He looked like he wanted to say more but didn't. Instead, he reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers barely grazed her skin, but she felt the touch like electricity. Good night, Arya. Good night. She climbed the stairs, feeling his eyes on her back. When she reached her room, she found a book on her nightstand, a novel she'd mentioned loving during dinner, a first edition that must have cost a fortune. The note tucked inside read, "Teach me to read this the way you do. Help me understand what I'm supposed to feel." Arya held the book for a long time, running her fingers over the embossed cover. Then she sat at the small desk by her window and wrote her own note. Chapter 3. Read it and tell me what it makes you feel. Not what you think it means. What it makes you feel. She slipped it under his study door on her way to brush her teeth. In the morning, she would find his response. Fear. It makes me feel fear. The good kind. The kind that comes before something changes. Is this what normal people call hope? And despite everything, despite all the reasons she shouldn't, Arya smiled. Some lessons start with questions, but they only succeed when both people are brave enough to answer. 3 weeks into their marriage, Arya finally understood what Luca had really asked of her. She woke to find him in her garden. Their garden, she'd started thinking of it, though she wasn't sure when the shift had happened. He sat on the bench under the cherry tree, surrounded by fallen blossoms, reading the novel she'd assigned him. "You're up early," she said, and he startled slightly. She realized with some satisfaction that she'd surprised him, that he wasn't always in perfect control. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted. "So I came here. I hope that's all right. It's your house. It's your garden." He closed the book, keeping his finger between the pages to mark his place. "I finished chapter 3. You asked what it made me feel." Arya settled onto the bench beside him, close enough to see the lines of exhaustion around his eyes. "And?" "Terrified," Luca said simply. "The protagonist loves someone he can't have, someone who could destroy everything he's built. And instead of walking away, instead of protecting himself, he walks toward her. He chooses vulnerability over survival." He turned to look at Arya, and his eyes were raw with something she couldn't name. "I understand him. For the first time in my life, I understand why someone would choose catastrophe over safety if it meant being seen." The morning air was cool, carrying the scent of roses and wet earth. Somewhere in the distance, birds were starting their daily arguments. The world felt very small and very large at the same time. "Luca, I need to tell you something," he interrupted. "About the condition, the real condition." Arya's heart quickened. "I thought teaching you to be human was the condition." "That's part of it, but not all of it." He set the book aside, turned his whole body toward her. "When I said I needed you to teach me to be human, what I really meant was, I need permission to fall in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and fragile. "That's the condition," he continued, his voice rough. "I need you to let me try, to not stop me when I start caring, to not punish me for wanting you in ways that have nothing to do with ownership or control." "That's impossible," he finished for her. I know. That's why I called it impossible. Because how do you give someone permission to love you when they've taken everything from you? How do you trust that love isn't just another form of possession? Arya's hands were shaking. She pressed them against her thighs to still them. You can't ask me for that. I know, but I'm asking anyway. His hand moved toward hers, stopped just short of touching. I'm not asking you to love me back. I'm not even asking you to like me. I'm just asking you not to hate me for it when I start looking at you like you're the only real thing in my life, because I think I'm already halfway there, and I don't know how to stop it. This isn't fair. Nothing about this is fair, Arya. Nothing about how we met, how we married, how we're sitting here trying to build something real out of a foundation made of coercion. He stood abruptly, paced away, ran his hands through his hair. But I can't pretend anymore. Can't pretend this is just about teaching me to be human or learning to read for feeling instead of strategy. He turned back to her, and his expression was devastated. When you walk into a room, I forget how to breathe. When you're angry at me, which is most of the time, and rightfully so, I want to fix it so badly it physically hurts. When you smile, which is rare and precious and never directed at me, I want to earn it. I want to be the kind of man who deserves that smile. Stop, Arya whispered. I can't. That's the problem. I've spent my whole life in control, and now I'm losing control of the one thing that matters. He moved closer, careful not to invade her space. So that's the impossible condition. Not that you love me back, not that you forgive me, just that you let me try to become someone worthy of you. Even knowing I might fail, even knowing you might never feel the same way. Arya stood, her legs unsteady. You're asking me to watch you fall in love with me while I'm still angry about being here, while I'm still processing the fact that my entire life was taken from me. Yes, that's cruel, Luca. That's asking me to carry your feelings on top of everything else. I know, his voice broke slightly, but I'd rather be honest and cruel than dishonest and kind. I'd rather you hate me for the truth than tolerate me for a lie. She wanted to run, to retreat to her room and lock the door, and pretend this conversation had never happened, but something kept her rooted there, in the garden that smelled like cherry blossoms and honesty. When did you know? She asked finally. The wedding. When you walked down that aisle looking terrified and defiant and so fucking brave. When you said I do with your voice shaking but your spine straight, I looked at you and thought, this woman is going to ruin me and I'm going to let her. I don't want to ruin you. I know that's what makes you perfect for the job. He smiled slightly sadly. So that's it. That's the condition. I'm going to fall in love with you. I think I'm already falling, and I need you to not stop me, to let it happen even if you never feel the same, to witness it the way you witness my attempts at humanity. Arya's mind was reeling. This was too much, too fast, too complicated. She'd barely begun to understand the man behind the reputation, and now he was asking her to carry his heart, while her own was still in pieces. I need time, she said. Take all the time you need. And space. Whatever you want. And, she paused, trying to find words for the complicated knot of feelings in her chest. And I need you to understand that this, whatever you're feeling, it doesn't obligate me to feel anything back. Not now. Not ever. I know. Do you? Because this sounds a lot like another way of controlling me, another way of making me responsible for your emotions. Luca flinched, as if she'd struck him. You're right. Fuck, you're right. He moved toward the garden exit, stopped. I'm sorry. I should have kept it to myself, should have learned to carry it without making it your burden. Luca, he turned back. I didn't say I wanted you to hide it. I said I needed you to understand it doesn't obligate me. Arya wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the morning sun. If you're going to fall in love with me, if that's already happening, then yes, I'd rather know. I'd rather see it coming than be blindsided. But you have to accept that I might never get there, that I might always be angry about how this started. I can accept that. Can you? Because men in your position don't usually accept not getting what they want. Then I'll learn. He took a step closer. I'll learn to want you in a way that doesn't require having you. I'll learn to love you in a way that leaves you free, even if it kills me, even if it's impossible. Arya studied his face, the exhaustion, the vulnerability, the desperate hope he was trying to hide. She thought about the last 3 weeks, the dinners where they'd talked about everything and nothing, the books they'd traded back and forth, filled with notes in the margins. The morning she'd found him in the kitchen at dawn. teaching himself to make coffee the way she liked it, because he'd noticed Rosa made it differently. The small ways he'd been trying to earn something he'd already taken. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay? I won't stop you, I'll witness it. But I can't promise anything else." "That's enough." His voice was rough with emotion. "That's more than enough." He left the garden before she could respond, before the moment could become more than either of them was ready for. Arya sank back onto the bench, surrounded by cherry blossoms, and tried to understand what had just happened. A man had asked permission to love her, had called it impossible and asked anyway, had given her the power to say no while being honest about the fact that he'd already started falling. She didn't know what to do with that kind of honesty, didn't know how to hold someone else's heart carefully when her own was still learning to beat again. But she'd said yes to witnessing it, to letting him try. And somehow, that felt like the most dangerous thing she'd ever agreed to. Rosa found her there an hour later, brought her tea without asking, sat beside her in comfortable silence. "He's never been like this before," Rosa said finally. "In all the years I've worked for this family, I've never seen him vulnerable. Never seen him want something he couldn't take. Is that supposed to make me feel better? No, it's supposed to help you understand what you're dealing with. He's learning to be human in real time, Arya, and he's chosen you as his teacher." Rosa patted her hand. "That's not a small responsibility, but it's also not a burden you have to carry alone. What if I can't do it? What if I can't teach him what he needs to learn? Then you'll both figure something else out. Together." Rosa stood, collected the teacups. "But I think you're underestimating yourself. You've already started changing him. He smiles more, sleeps less, paces his study at night like a teenager with a crush. That's not me changing him. That's just him being human." "Exactly," Rosa said with a knowing smile, and left Arya alone with her thoughts. That night, Arya found a new note under her door. "I know I asked for something impossible, but impossibility has never stopped me before. The difference is this time I want to earn it instead of taking it. Tell me how." She wrote back. "Start by learning the difference between deserving love and demanding it. Show me you can want me without needing to own me." His response came at dawn. "I'm trying. Some days I fail more than I succeed, but I'm trying. Is that enough?" Arya held the note for a long time before she wrote, "Ask me again in a month. Some questions don't have answers yet. Some conditions aren't requests for reciprocation. They're confessions of vulnerability dressed as bargains." Luca kept his promise about letting her leave the estate. Arya woke on a Thursday to find Marco waiting by the car. A different car this time, something black and sleek but less conspicuous than the usual vehicles. He nodded politely, opened her door, and said nothing as she directed him into the city. She went to her old bookshop first. The space had been rented to someone new, a coffee bar now, all exposed brick and vintage furniture. She stood outside and watched strangers drink lattes, where she used to shelve poetry collections, and felt the particular ache of a past life already erased. "You okay, Mrs. Vitale?" Marco asked quietly. "Don't call me that," she said. Then, more gently, "Just Arya, please." "Arya," he corrected, and she appreciated him for it. She wandered the city for hours, bought coffee from a cart that used to be her daily stop, browsed a bookstore where no one recognized her, sat in a park and watched people live their normal, uncomplicated lives, arguing about dinner plans, laughing at dogs, checking their phones with the particular boredom of people who had too many choices instead of none. Marco kept his distance like Luca had promised, close enough for safety, but far enough that she could almost pretend she was alone, free. Just a woman in a city on a Thursday afternoon. She was heading back to the car when she saw him, her ex-boyfriend, Daniel, standing outside a restaurant with a woman Arya didn't recognize, laughing about something, his hand casual on the woman's back. For a moment she considered just walking past, pretending she hadn't seen him, but some part of her, the part that still remembered who she used to be, needed this. Needed to face someone from her old life and see if any of that person remained. "Daniel," he turned. Recognition flickered across his face, followed quickly by discomfort. "Arya, hi. I heard about your dad. I'm sorry." "Are you?" His expression tightened. The woman beside him looked confused, glancing between them. "We should probably go." "Yes, you should go." Arya smiled, and it felt like cracking glass. "Don't let me interrupt your date." It's not. He stopped, looked at Arya properly for the first time. You look different. I am different. I heard you got married. Some business arrangement? The way he said it made it clear he'd heard exactly what kind of arrangement. Something like that. Look, Arya, what happened with your dad? The debts. I wanted to help, but I couldn't get involved in that kind of thing. You understand, right? The fact that he'd known and done nothing shouldn't have hurt. They'd broken up months before her father's debts came due, but somehow it did hurt. The casual way he'd written her off as too complicated, too dangerous to care about. I understand perfectly, she said. You were protecting yourself. It's what people do. It wasn't personal. No, it never is. She stepped back. Enjoy your dinner, Daniel. She walked away before he could respond, her vision blurring slightly. Marco was beside her immediately, his hand gentle on her elbow. You need a minute? I need a drink, she said. Is there a bar nearby that won't ask questions? Marco took her to a quiet place 3 blocks over. Dark wood, dim lights, the kind of establishment that understood discretion. He positioned himself by the door while Arya sat at the bar and ordered whiskey she didn't want but drank anyway. The bartender was older, with kind eyes and hands scarred from years of handling broken glass. She didn't ask questions, just refilled Arya's glass when it emptied and left her alone with her thoughts. Arya's phone buzzed. A text from Luca. Marco says you might need me. I can come get you. Or send a different car. Or do nothing. Tell me what helps. She stared at the message for a long time. The old Arya would have said she was fine, would have handled this alone, but the old Arya didn't exist anymore. Stay there. I'm coming home soon. Just needed to remember what the outside world looks like. His response was immediate. Does it look how you remembered? No. It looks smaller, stranger, like I don't fit there anymore. Do you fit here? The question lodged in her chest. She drank the rest of her whiskey before answering. I don't know. Ask me again later. She paid her tab and nodded to Marco. They drove back in silence, through streets that became progressively cleaner and emptier as they approached the estate. When they pulled through the gates, Arya saw Luca standing on the front steps, hands in his pockets, waiting. Marco opened her door. Miss Arya was very brave today, he said to Luca. Faced some hard things. Thank you for keeping her safe, Luca replied, and Marco nodded once before heading inside. Arya stood at the base of the steps, looking up at the man who'd promised to fall in love with her. He looked worried, tense, like he'd been holding his breath since she left. You waited, she said. I wanted to make sure you came back okay. I always come back. Where else would I go? Anywhere. Everywhere. He came down the steps to meet her. You had Marco. You had money. You could have disappeared. The truth of it settled between them. She could have run, could have vanished into the city and tried to build a new life somewhere he'd never find her. The fact that she hadn't, the fact that she'd come back voluntarily, changed something. I saw my ex-boyfriend today, Arya said. He was with someone new, living his life like I never existed, like my father's debts and my forced marriage were just unfortunate news he'd heard in passing. I can make him regret that. No, she met his eyes. That's not what I need. I don't need you to punish people who hurt me. Then what do you need? Arya considered the question. I need to know that this place, this life you've forced me into, means something. That it's not just another version of being erased. That I exist here as more than your wife or your responsibility. Luca reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he took her hand. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, gentle and careful. You exist here as Arya, he said quietly. Not my wife, not my responsibility, just Arya, who likes her coffee with too much cream and reads poetry when she's sad, who makes me want to be human, who came back today even though she could have disappeared. That's the impossible part, Arya said. I keep coming back, even though I'm still angry, even though this is still wrong. I keep choosing to be here. Why? She didn't have an answer, or rather she had too many answers and none of them made sense, because leaving felt like giving up, because despite everything, Luca was trying to change, because some part of her wanted to see if impossible things could become possible. Take me inside, she said instead. I'm tired. Luca kept her hand as they climbed the steps together. At her bedroom door he paused. Thank you for coming back, he said, and for telling me what happened. You didn't have to. You asked Marco to tell you. I asked him to tell me if you were safe. The rest, that was your choice to share. He released her hand carefully. "Sleep well, Arya." She watched him walk away, then closed herself in her room and sat by the window. The city lights glittered in the distance, full of people living normal lives. She could have been one of them again, could have run toward that normalcy and never looked back. Instead, she was here, in a prison made of expensive things and a man learning to be human, in a marriage that wasn't a marriage and a relationship that wasn't a relationship, but somehow felt more real than anything she'd had before. She didn't understand it, didn't trust it, but she couldn't deny it either. That night, she dreamed of cherry blossoms and choices that felt less like surrender than they should. Some risks aren't about leaving, they're about choosing to stay when you finally have the option to go. The family dinner happened in the 3rd month. Luca had warned her it was coming. His uncle, his 2 cousins, various business associates who needed to see the new wife and understand that the marriage was legitimate. Arya spent 3 days preparing, with Rosa helping her choose appropriate clothes and briefing her on who everyone was and what topics to avoid. "Remember," Rosa said, as she helped Arya into a dress that cost more than a car, "you're not there to be interesting. You're there to be appropriate. Smile when spoken to, agree with the men, and redirect any personal questions." Sounds like a nightmare. "Welcome to the family business," Rosa's expression softened. "But Luca will be right beside you the whole time. He won't let anyone hurt you." Arya wasn't sure if that made her feel better or worse. The dinner was held in the formal dining room, the one that felt like a museum, with a table long enough to seat 20 and crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than most people's houses. Arya arrived to find the room already filling with men in expensive suits and women wearing smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Luca was in the center of it all, playing his role of Don with practiced ease. But when he saw Arya, something in his expression shifted, softened. He crossed the room immediately, offered her his arm. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. "Look beautiful," he said quietly. "But more importantly, are you okay? Ask me again in 3 hours." "Fair enough." He guided her into the room, his hand warm on her back. "Stay close to me. Don't let anyone corner you alone." The dinner was exactly as terrible as she'd anticipated. The uncle, a man named Stefano with cold eyes and colder hands when he kissed her cheek in greeting, spent the first course asking invasive questions about her background, her family, her understanding of her role. Luca deflected most of them with practiced ease, his voice never rising but carrying enough weight that even Stefano backed off eventually. The cousins were younger, hungry for power in the way young men often are when they're born into families where violence is currency. They watched Arya with calculation, as if trying to determine if she was an asset or a liability. One of them, Carlo, she thought his name was, leaned across the table during the second course. "Tell me, Arya, how are you finding married life? Must be quite an adjustment going from a bookshop to all this." The way he said bookshop made it sound like an insult. "It's certainly different," she replied carefully. "But I'm learning." "Learning what? How to spend money?" He laughed, and several other men joined in. Arya felt Luca tense beside her. His hand found hers under the table, squeezed once in warning or support. She wasn't sure which. "Learning how to recognize small men pretending to be important," Arya said pleasantly. "It's fascinating, really. The insecurity required to insult someone you've just met." The table went silent. Carlo's face reddened. Stefano looked between them with something like interest. "Careful, Arya," Carlo said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're new here. You don't understand how things work." "I understand perfectly." She met his eyes without flinching. "I understand that some men mistake cruelty for strength because they've never had to be strong a day in their lives." "That's enough," Luca said quietly, but his eyes were on Carlo. "My wife has more courage than most men in this room, including you. Apologize. Now." The power in his voice was absolute. Carlo muttered something that might have been an apology, then excused himself from the table. The rest of the dinner passed in tense silence. Arya picked at her food and counted the minutes until she could escape. When it finally ended, when the last guest had left and the house fell quiet again, she found herself standing in the entrance hall with Luca, both of them still dressed for performance. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have warned you that Carlo is an asshole. I should have protected you better. You defended me. That's more than anyone else has done in months. I shouldn't have had to defend you. They shouldn't have attacked you in the first place." He ran a hand through his hair, disrupting the careful styling. This is exactly what I was afraid of, that bringing you into this world would expose you to people who see kindness as weakness. I'm not kind, you are. You're also brave and smart, and you don't take shit from anyone, which makes you dangerous to men like Carlo. He moved closer, his eyes searching her face. Are you okay? Really? I'm angry, but I'm not broken. Good. Stay angry. Angry keeps you sharp. He smiled slightly. Though maybe next time don't publicly humiliate my cousin in front of the entire family. He started it. I know, and I loved watching you finish it. The smile faded. But they'll remember this, Arya. They'll remember that you're not the dutiful wife they expected, that you have teeth. Is that a problem? No. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. It's perfect. You're perfect. The touch was so gentle, so unexpected, that Arya froze. They'd been careful around each other for weeks, friendly but distant, building something neither of them knew how to name. But this felt different. This felt like crossing a line. Luca, I know, I'm sorry. I shouldn't. He started to pull away, but Arya caught his wrist. Wait. They stood there in the entrance hall, her hand on his wrist, his hand still cupping her face. The chandelier above them cast complicated shadows. Outside, rain had started to fall. You defended me tonight, Arya said quietly, when you didn't have to, when it probably would have been politically smarter to let Carlo's comments slide. I'll always defend you. That's not negotiable. Why? Because you're mine to defend. He caught himself immediately. Not mine as in property, mine as in responsibility, care, something I've chosen to protect. What if I don't want to be anyone's to defend? What if I want to defend myself? Then I'll defend your right to defend yourself, and I'll still be there as backup when you need it. He smiled slightly. You're going to make me work for better answers, aren't you? Every single time. They were so close now, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough to feel his breath, smell the cedar and danger that always clung to him. I'm going to kiss you now, Luca said softly. If you don't want me to, step back. I'll understand. It won't change anything between us. Arya's heart hammered. This was a choice, a real choice, offered without expectation or demand. She could step back, and he would honor it, could maintain the careful distance they'd built. She didn't step back. Luca's kiss was gentle, achingly gentle, like he was afraid she might break. His hand stayed on her cheek, the other careful at her waist, never pulling her closer without permission. It was a kiss that asked questions instead of making demands. A kiss that tasted like hope and fear in equal measure. When they pulled apart, Arya's hands were shaking. Was that okay? Luca asked, his voice rough. I don't know. It was the truth. She felt too many things. Fear and desire and anger, and something that might have been the beginning of trust. Ask me again later. Always with the later. But he smiled as he said it. Can I walk you to your room? They climbed the stairs together in silence. At her door, Luca pressed a kiss to her forehead, chaste and careful. Thank you for surviving tonight, he said. Both the dinner and the kiss. Surviving seems to be my specialty lately. You're doing more than surviving, Arya. You're living. Even when it's hard, even when I make it harder. He stepped back. Sleep well. She watched him walk away, touched her lips where he'd kissed her, and wondered when this had become her life. When the man who'd taken everything from her had started to feel like someone she might choose. That night she didn't dream. She lay awake thinking about the difference between a kiss that demands and a kiss that asks. About the careful way Luca touched her, like she was something precious instead of something possessed. About the fact that she hadn't stepped back. In the morning, she found roses in her garden, white ones, like at their wedding, but also red. A note tucked among them. I know you said to ask again later. I'm patient. I can wait for your answer. L. She didn't write back immediately. Instead, she sat among the roses and tried to understand what it meant to kiss someone you were still learning not to hate. Tried to understand why it hadn't felt wrong. Some kisses aren't claims. They're questions asked with breath and touch instead of words. Everything shattered on a Tuesday night in November. Arya had been living at the estate for almost 4 months. 4 months of careful dinners and stolen kisses, and slowly learning to exist in the space between captive and willing participant. 4 months of watching Luca try to become human, of teaching him the difference between wanting and needing, of building something fragile and undefined. She should have known it couldn't last. The call came while she was in the library, reading by the fire. Rosa appeared in the doorway, her face carefully blank in the way that meant something terrible was happening. "Your father is here," Rosa said quietly. "Luca is handling it, but you should know." Arya's blood went cold. "My father? He's demanding to see you. Says he has rights. Luca is trying to send him away, but—" Arya was on her feet before Rosa finished. She moved through the house with purpose, following the sound of raised voices to Luca's study. Her father stood in the center of the room, looking smaller and more desperate than she remembered. Luca stood between them, his body angled protectively, his expression carved from ice. "Arya," her father said when he saw her. "Thank God. Tell him he has to let me see you. Why are you here?" Her voice came out flat, emotionless. "I needed to see you, to explain, to make sure you were all right. Now you care if I'm all right? 4 months too late. I had no choice. You had every choice." The words exploded out of her. "You gambled me away like I was nothing, like I was just another debt to be paid. And now you show up here pretending to care?" Her father's face crumpled. "I'm sorry. I know I failed you. But I'm your father. I needed to see that you were safe." "She's safe," Luca said coldly. "And you're leaving. Now." "I'm not leaving without talking to my daughter. You lost the right to call her that when you signed her away." Arya held up a hand, silencing them both. "How much?" Her father blinked. "What? How much do you need? Because that's why you're really here, isn't it? Not to check on me. To ask for money." The guilt on his face was answer enough. 50,000, he said finally. "Just to get back on my feet, just to clear some debts, then I'll disappear. You'll never have to see me again." Luca moved toward him, dangerous and controlled. "Get out, before I have you removed." "Arya, please," you heard him. Arya's voice was shaking now, rage finally breaking through the numbness. "Get out. You sold me once. You don't get to profit from me twice. I'm your father. You stopped being my father the moment you put your signature on those papers." She turned away, unable to look at him anymore. "Security will escort you out. If you come back, I won't be this kind." She heard her father try to argue, heard Luca make a call, heard footsteps and protests fading into silence. Then there was just the sound of her own breathing, too fast and too shallow, and Luca's careful presence behind her. "Arya, don't." She held up a hand, still not turning. "Don't tell me it's okay. Don't tell me he didn't mean it. Don't try to fix this. I won't. I'm just here." She turned then, and Luca's expression was devastated. Not for himself, but for her. For the pain she was carrying that he couldn't take away. "He came here for money," Arya said, and her voice broke on the last word. "After everything. After selling me, after disappearing, after months of silence, he came here for money. I know. I shouldn't be surprised. I shouldn't care, but I do. I care that my own father sees me as nothing more than a transaction. That's not on you. That's on him. Isn't it, though?" She moved to the window, wrapped her arms around herself. "Isn't this exactly what I've become? A transaction. A debt paid. A wife bought and paid for. No." Luca crossed the room in 3 strides. "That's not what you are. That's not what we are." "Then what are we, Luca? Because I don't know anymore. I thought I was learning to exist here, learning to be something other than a prisoner. But my father just showed me the truth. I'm still just a commodity, something that was bought, something that can be used." "You're not—" "Yes, I am," she spun to face him. "You bought me, Luca. You paid off my father's debts, and you took me and you dressed it up in pretty words about protection and teaching you to be human. But at the end of the day, I was purchased. I am owned. That's not how I see you. It doesn't matter how you see me. It matters what's true." Tears were streaming down her face now, hot and bitter. "And the truth is that I've been lying to myself, pretending that this could be something real, that the kisses meant something, that your impossible condition was sweet instead of manipulative, that I had any choice in any of this." Luca looked like she'd struck him. "Arya, please." "Please what? Please pretend it's different. Please keep playing house with you while my father shows up begging for money from the man who bought his daughter." She laughed, the sound broken and ugly. I can't do this anymore." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I need space, real space. Not just my own room in your house, not just a garden with a key. I need to not be here. not be anywhere near this life you've forced me into. I'll take you anywhere you want to go. We can travel, get away from here, from the family, from all of it. That's not space, Luca. That's just a different cage with better scenery. She moved toward the door. I need you to let me go. I can't. His voice was raw. I can't let you walk out of here with no protection, no resources. The people your father owed, they're still out there. They still see you as leverage. Then I guess I'm trapped either way. She opened the door. At least before, I didn't have to pretend I wanted to be here. Arya, she left before he could finish, ran to her room and locked the door, and finally let herself break. Let herself cry for all the versions of her life that had died, the one before her father's debts, the one where she'd had choices, the one where maybe she and Luca could have met differently and built something real. She cried until she had nothing left, until her eyes were swollen and her throat was raw and the room was dark with night. A knock came sometime past midnight, soft, hesitant. Arya? Luca's voice. I'm not going to ask you to open the door. I'm not going to ask you to forgive me or understand me or give me another chance. I just need you to know something. She stayed silent, her back against the door. You're right, he continued. About all of it. I did buy you. I did take your choices. And I can dress it up in pretty words about protection and teaching and impossible conditions, but none of that changes the fundamental truth. I forced you into this life because I wanted you here. His voice cracked slightly. But you're wrong about one thing. You're not a commodity. You're not something I own. You're a woman I've been falling in love with for 4 months while she teaches me what it means to be human. And the most human thing I can do right now is let you go. Arya's breath caught. Tomorrow morning, Marco will take you wherever you want to go. I've set up an account in your name. Enough money that you'll never have to worry about your father's debts or anyone he owes. Enough to disappear if that's what you choose. There's an apartment in the city, paid for a year in advance, completely separate from me or the family. It's yours. No strings, no conditions. She heard him shift against the door. If you want to come back, the door is always open. If you want to visit your garden, take your books, anything from this house, it's yours. If you never want to see me again, I'll honor that. I'll stay out of your life completely. Silence stretched between them, separated by inches of wood and miles of hurt. I'm sorry, Luca said finally, for taking your choices, for thinking I could fix what I'd broken by trying to love you well, for making you feel like a transaction when you've been the most real thing in my life. She heard his footsteps retreating, heard the sound of his study door closing. Arya slid down to sit with her back against the door, Rosa's words from months ago echoing in her mind. He's learning to be human in real time, and he's chosen you as his teacher. She'd taught him, all right. She'd taught him how to want without taking, how to love without owning, how to let go even when it destroyed him. She'd taught him to be human by breaking both their hearts. Outside her window, the cherry tree in her garden swayed in the wind, petals scattering like snow. She watched them fall and thought about freedom, about what it meant to be given a choice after months of having none, about whether the choice to leave felt like victory or just another kind of loss. She didn't sleep. She sat by the window and watched the night fade into dawn and tried to decide what freedom was worth. Some breaking points aren't endings. They're the moment when everything becomes terrifyingly, honestly real. Morning came, wrapped in fog. Arya sat at her window and watched the grounds disappear into white, the world reduced to the small circle of visibility around her room. Somewhere in the house, Luca was probably awake too, probably pacing his study, or standing at his own window, wondering if she would leave. Rosa knocked at 7, carrying coffee and a kindness that made Arya's throat tight. The car is ready whenever you are, Rosa said gently. Luca left instructions that you're to take anything you want. Books, clothes, anything from your garden. Marco will help load the car. Where is he, Luca? In his study. He's been there all night. Rosa set the coffee down, hesitated. He asked me to give you this. An envelope. Thick, expensive paper. Arya's name written in Luca's precise handwriting. She waited until Rosa left before opening it. Inside was a key. To the apartment he'd mentioned, she assumed. A bank card with her name embossed on it. And a letter. Harrier, I've never been good with words that aren't about business or strategy, but you taught me that some things require more than efficiency. They require honesty, even when it costs everything. I took you. I know that. No amount of pretty reasoning changes that fundamental truth. Your father's debts gave me an excuse, but the real reason was simpler and more selfish. I saw you, and I wanted you safe, wanted you near me, wanted to keep you. I told myself I was protecting you, that I was the lesser evil compared to the men your father owed. And maybe that's even true, but it doesn't matter. You didn't choose safety with me. You didn't choose any of this. So now I'm giving you what I should have given you from the beginning, a choice. The apartment is yours, the money is yours, your freedom is yours. If you never want to see me again, I'll honor that. I'll make sure no one from my world touches you. I'll make sure your father never finds you. You'll be safe and free, which is what you deserved all along. But if you come back, if you choose to come back, it won't be as my wife because a piece of paper says so. It'll be because you want to, because you've decided that what we've been building is worth more than how it started. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm just asking you to know that the door is always open, that I'll wait as long as it takes, that I'll become the kind of man worth coming back to, even if you never do. You taught me how to be human, Arya. You taught me that love isn't about possession or control, that it's about witness and choice, and the courage to let go even when every instinct screams to hold on tighter. So this is me letting go. Whatever you choose, thank you. For the dinners and the questions and the honesty that hurt. For the kiss that asked instead of demanded. For teaching me that impossible things are just things I haven't learned how to do yet. All my love, Elaria. Read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket. She packed slowly. Some clothes, not the expensive ones Luca had bought, but the few pieces from her old life that still fit. Books from the library, including the novel they'd read together with notes in both their handwriting filling the margins. A few flowers from her garden, pressed between pages to preserve them. Marco helped her carry everything to the car without comment. His eyes were sad, but understanding. "Ready, Miss Arya?" he asked. She looked up at the house. At the window she knew was Luca's study, though she couldn't see him through the glass. She thought about the last 4 months, about the man who'd bought her and then spent every day trying to earn what he'd taken, about impossible conditions and cherry blossoms and kisses that tasted like questions, about the fact that leaving felt less like freedom than it should. "Wait," she said. Give me 10 minutes. She climbed the stairs for what might be the last time, walked the halls she'd learned to navigate, stopped outside Luca's study door. She knocked. "Come in," his voice, rough from sleeplessness. Luca stood by the window, his back to the door. He didn't turn when she entered. Maybe he couldn't bear to watch her leave. "I read your letter," Arya said. "Okay. You're letting me go, actually letting me go with money and safety and no strings." "Yes." "Why?" He turned then, and his face was devastated but peaceful. "Because that's what you do when you love someone. You set them free even when it destroys you. You taught me that." Arya crossed the room slowly, stopped a few feet away from him. "What if I don't want to be set free?" Luca went very still. "What? What if I want to stay, not because I have to, not because I'm trapped or scared or trying to survive, but because I choose to?" "Arya, I'm still angry," she interrupted. "I'm furious about how this started, about my father and the debts, and the fact that I never got a choice. And I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive you for taking that from me. I understand. But," she continued, "I also know that the last 4 months have been the most honest I've ever been with anyone, including myself. You asked me impossible questions. You let me hate you. You tried to become someone different, not because it would benefit you, but because you wanted to deserve me." She took another step closer. "And yesterday, when my father showed up, you could have used it, could have played the hero, could have reminded me that you saved me from him. But you didn't. You just defended me, and then you let me break. And when I told you I needed to leave, you didn't fight it. You just let me go." Tears were streaming down her face now. "Do you know how rare that is, Luca? How few people will love you enough to let you leave, to give you real freedom even when it costs them everything." "Arya, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm not leaving, I'm choosing to stay. Not as your wife because a contract says so, not as your responsibility or your redemption project, but as Arya, who's falling in love with a man learning to be human, who wants to keep teaching you and learning from you and building something real." Luca's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You're choosing to stay? I'm choosing you, despite everything, because of everything, because you've shown me what it looks like when someone tries to become worthy of love instead of just demanding it. She closed the distance between them, took his face in her hands. "Ask me again," she said. "The impossible condition. Ask me properly this time." Luca's hands came up to cover hers, his touch gentle and reverent. "Arya Chen, will you let me love you? Not because I've trapped you here, not because you owe me anything, but because you want me to. Will you teach me how to be the kind of man who deserves you? Will you stay, not as my captive, but as my choice, as my partner, as the woman I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of?" "Yes," she whispered. "To all of it. Yes." He kissed her then, deep and desperate and full of 4 months of wanting and fear and impossible hope. Kissed her like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning. Kissed her like she was freedom instead of captivity, like she was choosing him instead of surviving him. When they pulled apart, both of them were crying. "I love you," Luca said, his voice breaking on the words. "I've loved you since you walked down that aisle looking terrified and brave, since you told me you hated me with such honesty that it felt like hope, since the first moment you let me see you as human instead of as a weapon." "I love you too," Arya said, and the words felt like truth, complicated, messy, imperfect truth. "I love you for trying, for changing, for learning to let go, for asking impossible things and then accepting that the answer might be no. The answer wasn't no. No, it wasn't." She smiled through her tears. "The answer is yes. I choose you, Luca Vitali. I choose this impossible, complicated, beautiful thing we're building." He held her for a long time, his face buried in her hair, his arms tight around her waist. Outside, the fog was lifting, revealing the gardens and the grounds and the world beyond the gates. "I still want the apartment," Arya said eventually, "and the freedom to come and go, and your continued commitment to becoming human. Anything, everything, whatever you need. And we're doing this right this time. No more pretending, no more performing for your family. We tell the truth, that this started wrong, but we're making it right." "Agreed." She pulled back to look at him. "And someday, when enough time has passed and we've built something real enough to survive it, I want to get married again. Actually married because we choose each other, not because of debts or obligations, but because we want to." Luca's smile was the most genuine thing she'd ever seen on his face. "Is that a proposal?" "It's a promise that someday, when we're ready, I'll say yes again. And this time, I'll mean it completely. I'll wait as long as it takes." "I know you will." She kissed him softly. "That's why I'm staying." They stood in his study as the morning sun burned away the last of the fog, holding each other like people who'd survived a war. And maybe they had. Maybe love was always a war between fear and hope, between control and trust, between the people we are and the people we're trying to become. Outside the door, Rosa smiled and quietly set down the tea service she'd been about to bring in. In the driveway, Marco unloaded Arya's bags back into the house, and in the garden, cherry blossoms continued their eternal fall, petals drifting down like tiny white flags of surrender. Some choices weren't about leaving or staying. They were about deciding that the thing you're building is worth more than the pain it took to start building it. Arya had made her choice. She was staying, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Some choices are made in spite of the past, and those are the choices that build a future. Winter arrived slowly, then all at once. Arya woke on a Saturday in December to find the grounds covered in snow, the world transformed into something clean and new. Luca was already awake beside her not in a separate room, because she'd asked him to stay 2 weeks ago, and he'd looked at her like she'd given him the world. "It's snowing," he said unnecessarily, his hand tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "I can see that. You've never seen snow here before, at the estate?" "No. Last year I was—" She paused. Last year she'd been someone else entirely. Someone who worked in a bookshop and dreamed of travel, and didn't know that her father was gambling her life away. "Last year you were free," Luca finished quietly. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to—" "Stop." She turned to face him. "We're not doing this anymore. The constant apologies, the walking on eggshells. What's done is done. We're building something new. I know. But sometimes I forget that I'm allowed to be happy without feeling guilty. Then learn faster." She kissed him. "I chose to stay, Luca. I chose this. Stop punishing yourself for something I've forgiven." "Have you forgiven me?" Arya considered the question. 2 months ago, the answer would have been no. Even 1 month ago, she wasn't sure. But now, watching him look at her with such vulnerable hope, she realized something had shifted. "I'm forgiving you," she said carefully. "It's not finished. It's not perfect. But I'm choosing to forgive you a little more every day. Because holding on to the anger was making me smaller. And I'm tired of being small." Luca's eyes were bright. "I don't deserve you. Probably not. But you're trying to. And that counts for something." They spent the morning in bed, talking, kissing, simply existing together without performance or pretense. It was a luxury Arya was still getting used to, the right to be lazy, to be unproductive, to just be. Later they walked through the snow-covered gardens together. Arya's garden looked different in winter, starker, more honest, beautiful in its bareness. "I have something for you," Luca said as they reached the cherry tree. He pulled a small box from his pocket, and Arya's heart jumped before she reminded herself they'd agreed to wait, to do things right, to rebuild before they rushed forward. "It's not what you think," Luca said quickly, reading her expression. "Open it." Inside was a key, not silver or gold, but iron, old and intricate. "It's to the East Wing Library," Luca explained. "The private one. No one's been allowed in there except my father and then me. But I want you to have access to all of it. The books, the space, the history. Why? Because you love books. Because you used to have a shop full of them and I took that from you because—" He hesitated. "Because I want you to know that everything I have is yours. Not because you're my wife on paper, but because I choose to share my life with you." Arya turned the key over in her palm. It was heavy, substantial, real. "Show me," she said. The East Wing Library was extraordinary. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, first editions, rare volumes, a collection that must have taken generations to build. But what caught Arya's attention was the reading nook by the window, a space clearly designed for one person, with perfect light and a view of the gardens. "My father used to read here," Luca said quietly, "before he was killed. It was the only place I ever saw him relaxed. The only time he seemed like something other than a don. You miss him. I miss the idea of him. The father he might have been if he'd had the courage to be human instead of always being a weapon." Luca moved to the window. "I used to think becoming like him was inevitable, that this life required hardness, distance, control, that love was a weakness I couldn't afford. And now? Now I know that hardness was the weakness. That distance was cowardice. That the bravest thing I'll ever do is let myself love you without armor." Arya crossed to him, took his hand. "Your father would probably hate what you're becoming. Probably. Good. You're becoming something better." They spent the afternoon in the library, Arya pulling books from shelves and reading passages aloud, while Luca listened with an attention that felt like worship. It was the most ordinary thing, two people sharing books and space and comfortable silence. It was also a kind of miracle. That night, the family dinner was smaller, just Stefano and one of the cousins, the one who hadn't insulted Arya at the last gathering. Luca had made it clear, anyone who disrespected his wife wasn't welcome. Period. The dinner was still formal, still careful, but less hostile. Stefano watched Arya with something like respect now. She'd proven she had teeth, that she wouldn't be easily dismissed or controlled. "I hear you've been making changes," Stefano said to Luca over dessert, "to how the business operates, more legitimate ventures, less traditional methods." "Arya's influence," Luca said simply, and Arya startled. They hadn't talked about this. "Is that wise? Softening our approach?" "It's not softening. It's evolving. There's a difference." Luca's hand found Arya's under the table. "I'm learning that strength doesn't always look like violence, that power doesn't always require fear." Stefano's expression was unreadable. "Your father would have disagreed. My father is dead. I'm not." Luca's voice was firm. "And I'm building something different, something that might actually last beyond the next generation." After dinner, after the guests had left, Arya found Luca in his study. "You didn't tell me you were changing the business," she said. "I'm trying to. It's slow. There are parts that can't be made fully legitimate. The history runs too deep. But I'm shifting what I can, reducing harm where possible, building something that doesn't require quite so much darkness. Because of me. Because you showed me there was another way. Because loving you made me want to be someone who could walk in daylight instead of always hiding in shadows." Arya moved around the desk, settled into his lap. His arms came around her immediately, holding her close. "I'm proud of you," she said, "for trying, for changing. for becoming someone different than who you were raised to be. Are you happy? He asked. Here, with me, in this life we're building. Arya considered the question honestly. Was she happy? Completely? Without reservation? No. There were still hard days. Still moments when she remembered her old life and felt the loss of it. Still times when the weight of what he'd taken from her felt too heavy to carry. But there were also mornings like today, waking up beside someone who was trying so hard to be worthy of her, afternoons in libraries full of books, evenings in gardens where cherry blossoms would bloom again in spring, moments when love felt less like a cage and more like a choice she was making over and over. I'm getting there, she said finally. Ask me again in 6 months. Ask me again in a year. Ask me again when we've built even more than we have now. Always with the later. That's because the answer keeps getting better. She kissed him softly. I'm not completely happy yet, but I'm happier than I was yesterday, and I think I'll be even happier tomorrow. That's enough for now. It's more than enough, Luca said. It's everything. They sat together in his study while snow fell outside, building silence into something comfortable and true, building a life out of impossible beginnings, building love out of everything it shouldn't have been able to survive. And if it wasn't perfect, if there were still scars and questions and moments of doubt, well, maybe that was okay. Maybe perfect wasn't the goal. Maybe the goal was just to keep choosing each other, keep trying, keep becoming people who deserved the love they were building. Outside, the city lights flickered on. Inside, 2 people who'd started as captor and captive held each other and called it home. Some transformations are never finished. They're just continually chosen day after day, until choosing becomes as natural as breathing. Spring returned with cherry blossoms and reckoning. Arya had been living at the estate for almost a year when her father showed up again. Not at the gates this time, but intercepted by security downtown while Arya was at a bookstore, the new one she'd opened 3 months ago with Luca's silent backing, a project that was hers and hers alone. Marco called immediately. Ms. Arya, we have a situation. Her blood went cold. After months of peace, of building something real with Luca, the past had come back to remind her that nothing was ever truly settled. Where is he? We're holding him at the security office. Luca says it's your choice. We can make him disappear or you can see him. Whatever you want. Whatever she wanted. A year ago, she'd have laughed at the idea that she had choices. Now standing in her bookshop surrounded by shelves she'd curated herself, choices felt like oxygen. Essential, and finally, wonderfully available. I'll see him, she said. But Luca comes with me. They met at a neutral location, a hotel conference room, impersonal and empty. Her father looked worse than he had 6 months ago. Thinner, grayer, with the particular desperation of a man who'd run out of options. Luca stood beside Arya, his hand resting lightly on her back. Not controlling, just present, offering support without demanding she accept it. Arya, her father started, and she held up a hand. No, you don't get to say my name like it means something to you. You don't get to play the hurt father. We both know why you're here. I need help. You always need help, that's the problem. You've spent your whole life needing, taking, destroying, and expecting other people to clean up your messes. She moved closer, and he stepped back involuntarily. Good. He should be afraid. I was one of those messes, a daughter you gambled away because you needed money more than you needed me. I had no choice. Everyone has choices. The words exploded out of her. You could have walked away from the gambling, could have asked for help, could have done literally anything except sell your daughter to a stranger. I was protecting you. Liar. Luca's voice was cold. You were protecting yourself. The men you owed would have killed you. So you sacrificed her instead. Her father's face crumpled. I'm sorry, I know I failed you, but I'm still your father. That has to count for something. Arya studied him. This man who'd given her life, and then systematically destroyed her ability to live it freely. She thought about the girl she'd been a year ago, terrified and trapped. Thought about the woman she was now, strong enough to face her past without flinching. You're right, she said finally. You are my father. And that does count for something. It counts as the reason I'm going to help you one last time. Hope flickered across his face. Luca has arranged for a debt consolidation program. You'll work with a financial counselor. You'll attend Gamblers Anonymous meetings. Actually attend them, not just sign in and leave. And you'll have a stipend. Enough to live on, but nothing excessive. Nothing you can gamble with. Arya, I'm not finished. In exchange, you will never contact me again. You will never show up at my businesses, my home, or anywhere I might be. You will take the help offered, and you will disappear from my life completely. Do you understand? Her father looked between her and Luca. And if I refuse? Then you get nothing, Luca said simply. And the men you currently owe will be informed that we're no longer offering protection. You'll be on your own. That's cruel. That's generous, Arya corrected. I could let you rot. I could make you suffer the way you made me suffer. But I'm choosing to be better than you. I'm choosing to help you one last time, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to let go of the anger I've been carrying. She moved to the door, paused with her hand on the handle. Take the deal or don't. I don't care anymore. Either way, this is the last time you'll see me, the last time you'll have any claim on my life or my compassion. She left without waiting for his answer. Luca followed, catching up to her in the hallway where she was shaking with adrenaline and relief, and a grief she hadn't known she was still carrying. You okay? He asked. I will be. She let him pull her into an embrace, buried her face in his chest. Is that terrible? That I don't want him in my life at all? It's honest, and you've earned the right to be honest about what you need. Did I do the right thing? Offering help? You did the kind thing. Whether it's right depends on what he does with it. Luca kissed the top of her head. But you're right that you deserve to let go, to stop carrying his choices like they're your responsibility. They drove back to the estate in comfortable silence, Arya processing what she'd done. She'd faced the source of her pain and offered mercy without weakness, had drawn boundaries that honored both her compassion and her needs, had proven to herself that she was strong enough to choose kindness without sacrificing her own peace. That night, she and Luca sat in their garden now, truly, a space they'd both claimed and shaped together. The cherry blossoms were in full bloom, petals drifting down like snow made of flowers. I want to get married again, Arya said suddenly. Luca turned to her, surprise and hope warring on his face. You said... I said someday. I said when we were ready. When we'd built something real enough to survive. She took his hand. Luca, we've survived my father, your family, the entire terrible way this started. We've built a life that's ours, not one forced on us. I think we're ready. Are you sure? I'm sure. I want to marry you. Actually marry you because I choose you. Because I love you. Because this impossible thing we've built deserves to be celebrated properly. Luca's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Then marry me, Arya Chen. Not because of debts or obligations. Not because I'm keeping you here, but because you want to. Because we're choosing each other. Yes, she said, and the word felt like freedom. Yes, I'll marry you. Again. The right way this time. He kissed her there in the garden, surrounded by falling petals and the particular magic of spring. Kissed her like she was everything he'd hoped for, like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. When they pulled apart, both of them were crying and laughing in equal measure. Small ceremony, Arya said. Just Rosa and Marco and maybe your uncle if he promises to behave. Just us, promising forever because we mean it this time. Whatever you want. I want honesty. I want vows we write ourselves. I want to look at you and promise to keep choosing you. And I want you to promise the same thing back. I've been making that promise every day for a year, Luca said softly. I'll just be happy to say it out loud finally. They stayed in the garden until the stars came out, planning a wedding that would be theirs, making promises that felt real because they were built on truth instead of coercion. And when they finally went inside, Arya realized something profound. The estate didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like home, not because the place had changed, but because she had. Because she'd transformed from a woman who was trapped into a woman who chose to stay. Because she'd learned that freedom wasn't about where you lived or who you were with. It was about whether you had agency over your own life. She had that now. Hard-won, fiercely protected, completely hers. And she was choosing to use it to build a life with the man who'd learned to love her by learning to let her go. Some reckonings aren't about revenge. They're about releasing the past so the future has room to breathe. They married on a Saturday in May, exactly 1 year and 2 weeks after the first wedding. This time, Arya wore a dress she'd chosen herself, simple ivory linen that moved like water, comfortable and hers. This time she walked through the garden with no one giving her away because she wasn't being given. She was going, choosing, moving toward a future she wanted instead of away from a past she couldn't escape. Luca waited under the cherry tree, and when he saw her, his expression broke into something so raw and honest that Arya felt her breath catch. This was what love looked like when it wasn't demanded, when it was earned and offered and received with gratitude instead of expectation. Rosa stood as their witness, crying openly. Marco was there too, stoic, but smiling. Stefano had sent his blessings but hadn't come. They were still rebuilding that bridge, and Arya appreciated that he'd respected the intimacy of the moment. The officiant was a woman Rosa had recommended, someone who understood that this wasn't a traditional ceremony, someone who knew how to make space for complicated truths. "We're here today," she began, "not to bind two people together, but to witness them choosing to bind themselves, to celebrate a love that was born in darkness but grew toward light, to honor the courage it takes to build something beautiful from impossible beginnings." Arya had written her vows the night before, sitting at the desk in what used to be just her room, but was now their room. The words had come easier than she'd expected. "Luca," she said, her voice steady, "a year ago I stood across from you in a church and said vows I didn't mean, made promises I didn't want to keep, pledged myself to a stranger I was terrified of." She took his hands, felt them trembling slightly. "Today I stand across from you in a garden we built together, and I say these vows with my whole heart. I choose you, not because I have to, not because I'm trapped or scared or out of options, but because you've spent every day of the last year trying to become worthy of being chosen." Tears were streaming down both their faces now. "I promise to keep seeing you as human, even when you slip back into being a weapon. I promise to tell you the truth even when it's hard, even when it makes you uncomfortable or challenges you to grow. I promise to love you not despite how we started, but including how we started, because that impossible beginning taught us both what it means to really choose each other." She squeezed his hands. "I promise to stay not out of obligation, but because every day I wake up and decide that this life we're building is worth choosing. You're worth choosing. We're worth choosing. And I promise to keep choosing us, for as long as I'm able." Luca had to take a moment before he could speak, his voice rough with emotion. "Arya," he began, "I took your choices a year ago. I took your freedom, your future, your right to decide your own life, and I told myself it was protection, that I was keeping you safe. But the truth is I wanted you, and I was too much of a coward to earn you the right way." He brought her hands to his lips, kissed her knuckles softly. "You could have hated me forever. You should have, but instead you taught me how to be human. You taught me that love isn't about owning someone, that it's about witnessing them, supporting them, setting them free, even when it destroys you." His voice cracked. "So today I make you these promises. I will never take your choices again. I will always give you room to leave, to grow, to change your mind. I promise to earn your love every single day, not because I'm owed it, but because you deserve someone who never stops trying to be worthy of you." He touched her face gently. "I promise to love you in ways that make you more yourself, not less. To support your dreams even when they don't include me. To be honest even when honesty costs me. To keep becoming the kind of man you can choose freely without reservation or regret." He smiled through his tears. "And I promise to keep asking if you're happy, to keep checking in, to never assume that because you chose me once, you'll keep choosing me. Because your choice and renewed every day freely given is the most precious thing I'll ever receive." The officiant smiled. "By the power vested in me, and more importantly, by the power you vest in yourselves, I pronounce you married. Actually married, because you choose each other." When Luca kissed her this time, it felt different than every kiss before. It felt like a promise made and accepted, like two people who'd survived the impossible becoming something new together. The celebration was small. Rosa had prepared a dinner that felt more like a family meal than a wedding reception. They ate in the smaller dining room, the one with windows that overlooked the garden, and talked about everything and nothing. "To new beginnings," Marco toasted, raising his glass, "and to having the courage to choose them. To impossible things becoming possible," Rosa added, "and to the two of you for proving that love doesn't have to be easy to be real." Arya and Luca toasted each other silently, their eyes saying everything words couldn't. Later, when the sun had set and the candles burned low, they walked through the garden together. The cherry blossoms were mostly gone now, replaced by green leaves and the promise of fruit to come. "Happy?" Luca asked. "Completely," Arya said, and realized it was true. Not happy in the way fairy tales promise, with all problems solved and all wounds healed, but happy in the way real life allows, with scars that had become stories, with pain that had transformed into wisdom, with a love that was built on truth instead of fantasy. "I never thought I'd get here," she admitted. "Never thought I'd stand in this garden and feel like I belonged, like I chose this. You did choose this. You've been choosing it day by day for months now. I know, but it feels different saying vows, making it official, telling the universe that this is what I want." Luca pulled her close and she rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for giving me a second chance, for teaching me, for staying when you could have left. Thank you for learning, for changing, for becoming someone I could choose." They stood there as the moon rose, two people who'd started in darkness and found their way to light. Not perfectly, not easily, but together. And that, Arya thought, was more than enough. Some vows are spoken once and honored forever, but the truest vows are renewed every morning, in the choice to stay and keep building. 6 months after the second wedding, Arya woke to morning sickness and possibility. She stared at the pregnancy test in her hand, her mind reeling through 1,000 emotions at once: fear, joy, uncertainty, hope. A year and a half ago, the idea of having a child in this life would have felt like a prison sentence. Now, it felt like a choice, complicated and terrifying, and somehow exactly right. Luca found her sitting on the bathroom floor, the test still in her hand. "Arya?" He crouched beside her immediately. "What's wrong?" She held up the test wordlessly. His eyes went wide. Are we pregnant?" "Yes." She searched his face for a reaction. Are you terrified?" he admitted. "Completely terrified, and happy, and terrified about being happy." He sat beside her on the cold tile. "How do you feel?" "All of those things, plus angry at my body for making this decision without asking me first." She laughed shakily. "Which is ridiculous, I know, but I spent so long having no control, and now my body is just doing this." "We have choices," Luca said carefully. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you. If you want this baby, I want this baby. If you don't, we don't. Your body, your choice. Always." Arya leaned against him, grateful for his steadiness. "I think I want this. I'm scared. I don't know if I'm ready, but I think I want to try." "Then we try. Together," they told Rosa first, who cried and immediately started planning nurseries and baby-proofing and making lists of things they'd need. They told Marco, who looked terrified and proud in equal measure. They told Stefano at a family dinner, and for the first time since Arya had known him, he smiled genuinely. "A baby," he said. "A new generation. Your father would have been complicated about it," Luca finished. But yes, he would have wanted this. As Arya's pregnancy progressed, things shifted. Not dramatically, but in small ways that accumulated into something significant. Luca became even more protective, but checked himself constantly, asking if she needed space, if she felt suffocated, if his worry was becoming controlling. "I'm trying," he'd say whenever he caught himself hovering, "but you're carrying our child, and every instinct I have says to wrap you in protective padding." "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Arya would respond. But she appreciated that he tried, that he kept choosing to trust her agency even when fear made him want to control everything. The bookshop thrived. Arya worked there through her second trimester, only cutting back when the exhaustion became too much. She'd built something remarkable, a space that felt like her old shop, but better, bigger, more hers, a place where people came not just for books, but for community, for connection, for the particular magic of stories shared. Luca had continued transforming the business, more legitimate ventures, less violence. It wasn't perfect. Some things couldn't be completely cleaned up in a single generation, but he was trying, building something their child could inherit without shame. On a cold November evening, 7 months into the pregnancy, Arya's water broke. The labor was long and painful and transformative in ways she hadn't expected. Luca stayed beside her the entire time, holding her hand, breathing with her, being present without trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. "I can't do this," she gasped at one point, exhausted and desperate. "You are doing this," he said firmly. "You're the strongest person I know. You survived me. You can survive anything." When their daughter finally arrived, tiny and perfect and screaming, Arya looked at Luca and saw him completely undone, tears streaming down his face, hands shaking as he held their child for the first time. "She's so small," he whispered. "So fragile." "She's stronger than she looks," Arya said. "She comes from strong people, complicated people, people who learned how to choose each other. They named her Sophia." Rosa cried when they told her, honored that they'd chosen a name so close to hers. The baby had Luca's dark hair and Arya's eyes, and holding her felt like holding the future, uncertain but full of possibility. The first few weeks were chaos, sleepless nights and constant worry, and the particular exhaustion of new parents learning how to keep a tiny human alive. But they did it together, trading off midnight feedings and diaper changes, and the 1,000 small tasks that came with a newborn. One night, at 3 in the morning, Arya found Luca in the nursery. Sophia was asleep in his arms, and he was just watching her. His expression was so tender, so full of wonder, that Arya's heart hurt with love. "She's perfect," he said without looking up. "And I'm terrified of failing her." "You won't." "How do you know?" "Because you failed me and you learned from it. You became someone better, someone worthy. You'll do the same for her." Arya moved closer. "And you won't be doing it alone. We're partners now. Actually partners. We figure things out together." Luca looked up at her, and his eyes were full of something Arya had come to recognize as peace. Not the absence of fear or struggle, but the presence of something worth fighting for. "I never thought I'd have this," he said quietly. "A family, a wife who chose me, a daughter to protect not because it's my duty, but because I want to, a life that feels like more than just survival." "You have it," Arya said. "We built it, out of impossible beginnings and terrible choices, and the courage to keep trying even when we wanted to give up." She took Sophia from his arms, settled into the nursing chair. Luca sat beside them, his hand on Arya's shoulder, and they watched their daughter sleep. Outside, the world continued its chaos. But inside, in a nursery decorated with books and soft lights and hope, a family that shouldn't have been possible existed anyway. "Thank you," Luca whispered, "for giving me this, for giving us this. Thank you for becoming someone I could give it to." They sat in the quiet darkness, 3 people learning how to be a family, learning that love was always complicated, always imperfect, but sometimes, if you were brave enough to keep choosing it, absolutely worth every impossible moment. Some futures aren't given. They're built, one brave choice at a time, by people who refuse to let their past define them. 2 years after the forced marriage, Arya stood in her bookshop, holding her daughter. Sophia was 6 months old now, all fat cheeks and curious eyes, reaching for everything with the particular determination of someone learning that the world was full of things worth grabbing. A customer was browsing the poetry section. Another was asking Rosa, who helped out 3 days a week now, about book recommendations. It was an ordinary Tuesday. Nothing special, nothing dramatic. And that, Arya realized, was the miracle. She'd built this life, not perfectly, not without pain or struggle or moments of doubt, but she'd built it, had taken the pieces of a shattered beginning and reassembled them into something that felt like home. Luca appeared in the doorway, holding coffee from the cart down the street. He'd learned her order perfectly. Too much cream, 1 sugar, served in a cup instead of a to-go container because she liked to savor it. "Your usual," he said, setting it on the counter. Then he took Sophia from her arms, lifting their daughter high and making her giggle. "And how's my favorite girl today?" "She's good, tried to eat a bookmark earlier." "That's my daughter, already loving books." He kissed Sophia's forehead, then looked at Arya. "You okay? You look contemplative." "I'm just thinking." About how strange it is, that this is my life now, that we're here doing normal things, coffee and bookshops and a baby who eats bookmarks." Luca's expression softened. "Is strange good or strange bad?" "Strange wonderful," Arya said. "Strange like a miracle, like something that shouldn't have been possible but happened anyway." She moved around the counter, stood close enough to feel his warmth, to breathe in the cedar scent she'd come to associate with safety instead of danger. 2 years ago, I stood in a church and thought my life was ending. I thought I was being sentenced, imprisoned, that I'd never feel anything but fear and anger and the particular desperation of someone with no choices. "Arya, let me finish." She touched his face gently. 2 years ago, I was right. That version of my life was ending. The one where I was small and powerless and alone. But what I didn't know was that endings can be beginnings, that sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what you're actually capable of building. Sophia grabbed at Arya's hair, and she gently extracted the tiny fist. You took my choices, Luca. That's still true. That will always be true. But then you gave them back. You learned to let me go, learned to love without owning. And because of that, because you became someone different, I got to become someone different too. You were always strong, Luca said. I didn't make you that. No, but you made me realize it, made me fight for it, made me prove to myself that I could survive impossible things and still choose joy on the other side. A customer approached with books to purchase, and Arya excused herself to help them. As she rang up the sale, made small talk about weather and recommendations, she caught Luca's eye. He was watching her with such open adoration, such uncomplicated love, that it took her breath away. This was the man who'd taken everything from her, and this was also the man who'd given her everything back, plus more. The man who'd learned to be human because she'd taught him. The man she'd chosen again and again until choosing him felt as natural as breathing. After the shop closed, they walked home together. Home. That word still felt miraculous. Sophia babbled nonsense between them, fascinated by the evening light. Luca held Arya's free hand, his thumb tracing familiar patterns on her palm. I have something for you, he said as they reached the estate gates. Another gift? You're incorrigible. This one is different. He led her to the garden, their garden, where cherry blossoms would bloom again come spring. Open it. Inside a leather folder were documents. It took Arya a moment to understand what she was looking at. Property deeds, business licenses, bank account information. It's the bookshop, Luca explained. Fully in your name. No silent backing, no hidden ownership. Just yours. Completely, legally, irrevocably yours. Luca, and the building it's in. I bought it, also in your name, so you'll never have to worry about rent or leases or anyone taking it from you. He pulled out another set of papers. And this account, it's yours, not ours, just yours. Money that I have no access to, no control over. Your safety net, your freedom fund. Arya's hands were shaking. Why? Because 2 years ago, I took your freedom, your choice, your right to build your own life, and I've been trying to give it back ever since, but I realized I was still involved, still present in ways that might feel like control, even when I didn't mean it that way. He moved closer, took her face in his hands. So this is me letting go completely, making sure you have everything you need to leave if you ever want to build a life completely separate from me if that's what you choose. You're not trapped here, Arya. You never have to be trapped again. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. You're giving me the means to leave you? I'm giving you the means to stay freely. There's a difference. He smiled slightly. You taught me that. That real love means making sure the person you love has every option, every choice, every escape route, and still hoping they choose you anyway. You're an idiot, she said, laughing through her tears. A beautiful, impossible idiot. Does that mean you're not leaving? It means I'm staying, not because I have to, not because I don't have options, but because you just proved once again that you're the kind of man worth choosing. She kissed him there in the garden, where everything had begun and continued and transformed. Kissed him like he was her choice, her partner, her impossible love story made real. Sophia protested the lack of attention, and they pulled apart, laughing. They went inside together, a family made of impossible pieces, and had dinner in the smaller dining room. Rosa joined them as she often did now, and they talked about ordinary things. Sophia's sleep schedule, a shipment of books coming to the shop, plans for Thanksgiving. It was mundane. It was perfect. That night, after Sophia was asleep and the house was quiet, Arya found Luca in their bedroom. He was standing at the window looking out at the gardens bathed in moonlight. Thinking, she asked, remembering, that first night, when you stood at this same window and looked like you were trying to figure out how to survive me. I was. And now? Now I'm trying to figure out how to keep choosing you without losing myself in the process. But I think I've figured it out. She wrapped her arms around him from behind. The trick is making sure that choosing you makes me more myself, not less. And somehow, impossibly, it does. Luca turned in her embrace. I love you, Arya Vitale. Not because I have to. Not because you're mine, but because you chose to stay when you had every reason to leave. because you taught me what love actually looks like, because every day with you feels like being given a gift I don't deserve, but will spend my life trying to earn. I love you too, she said, despite everything, because of everything, because you learned, because you changed, because you gave me back my freedom and trusted me to use it to stay. They held each other in the moonlight, two people who'd survived the impossible, who'd built love out of coercion and choice out of captivity, who'd proven that endings could be beginnings if you were brave enough to keep choosing transformation. Outside, the city glittered with possibility. Inside, a family slept and dreamed and existed in the particular piece of people who'd fought for their happiness and won. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were still hard days ahead, still moments of doubt and struggle, and the weight of a past that would never fully disappear. But it was real, and it was theirs, and it was enough, more than enough. It was everything. Some love stories don't start with once upon a time. They start with impossible conditions and terrible choices. But the best ones, they end with, we chose each other anyway, and that's the only magic that matters. Some loves aren't written in fairy tales. They're written in the margins of impossible choices, in the space between captivity and freedom, in the courage it takes to build something real from terrible beginnings. If this story reminded you that transformation is possible, that love can grow in the darkest places, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose to stay when you finally have the option to leave, share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us about a time you chose something difficult because it led to something beautiful. Tell us about the people who learned to be better because you taught them. Tell us your own impossible love story. And subscribe so you don't miss any of the love stories we share here. Because each one carries a different truth. Each one asks something different of the heart. Each one proves that love doesn't have to be easy to be real. Some stories don't end neatly. They just become part of who we are. The scars that turned into wisdom, the forced marriages that became chosen partnerships, the impossible conditions that became the foundation of something true. Thank you for staying with Arya and Luca, for witnessing their transformation, for believing that even the most broken beginnings can lead to beautiful endings. We'll see you in the next story, because love, in all its complicated form,